Hey guys, how's it going? Natalie here. Today is our Boundaries book day. I hope you enjoy.
If you want the best of my heart, you just gotta see the good in me. 'Cause I could be the rain in your desert sky.
So where I left off last time was in chapter 2, and we were talking about the parameters and everything of boundaries, where we need to place those parameters, and stuff like that, and how to when to say no, when not to say no. So I'm just going to continue with that at the part where it said 2 and 4. So who are the boundaries for, who are the parameters for, and stuff like that. So let's get into it. So it says, we are responsible to others and for ourselves. Carry each other's burdens, says Galatians chapter 6, verse 2. In this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ. This verse shows our responsibility to one another. So forgive me if I stutter a little bit. I do stutter, so I apologize ahead of time. It says, many times others have burdens that are too big to bear. They do not have enough strength, resources, or knowledge to carry the load, and they need help. Denying ourselves to do for others what they cannot do for themselves is showing the sacrificial love of Christ. This is what Christ did for us. He did what we could not do for ourselves. He saved us. This is being responsible too. In other words, chapter 6, verse 5 says, each one should carry their own load. Everyone has responsibilities that only he or she can carry. These things are our own particular load, and we need to take daily responsibility for and work out. So no one can do certain things for us. We have to take ownership of certain aspects of life that are our own load. The Greek words for burden and load give us the insight into the meaning of these texts. The Greek word for burden means excess burden. So our burdens that are so heavy that they weigh us down. These burdens are like boulders, and they can crush us. We shouldn't be expected to carry a boulder by ourselves. It's just like a boulder in your garden. You move to a new house, you want to make a new garden, you have this great big boulder there. What are you going to do? Are you going to lift it on your own? Absolutely not. You're either going to hire a truck to lift it, or you're going to hire a couple of friends to come over and help you lift it, or whatever. You're not going to do that on your own. Those times, we can't lift it ourselves because it would break our backs. We need help with the boulders. So those times of crisis and tragedy in our lives. So this is where I'm saying, like, we definitely do need help sometimes. And like, for me, I have an issue with that. I have a hard time asking for help. So that's something I need to work on. So in contrast, the Greek word for load means cargo. So we need, or the burdens of a daily toil. This word describes everyday things we all need to do. These loads are like knapsacks. Knapsacks are possible to carry, and we are expected to carry our own. We are expected to deal with our own feelings, attitudes, and behaviors, as well as the responsibilities God has given each one of us, even though it takes effort. So it is going to take effort sometimes. And I know a lot of your teenagers, it's like we ask them to do the dishes, and they're like, ugh. But the kitchen's over there, it's so far, it's so much effort. That requires work. Though that's the response I get sometimes. So problems arise when people act as if their boulders are daily loads and refuse to help. Or as if their daily loads are boulders and they shouldn't have to carry them. The result of these two instances are either perpetual pain or irresponsibility. Let's say, lest we say stay in pain or become irresponsible, it is very important to determine that me is where my boundary of responsibility is and where someone else's begins. We will define what we are responsible for later in this chapter. So for now, let's look more closely at the nature of boundaries. So, good in, bad out. So boundaries help us to distinguish our property so we can take care of it. They help us to guard our heart with all diligence. And that's in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. And keep things that will harm us outside. In short, boundaries help us to keep the good in and the bad out. So they guard our treasures, which in Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 and 20, so that people will not steal them. They keep the pearls inside and the pigs outside, which is in Matthew. They talk about that in Matthew chapter 7, verse 6. So sometimes we have had bad on the inside and good on the outside. In these instances, we need to be able to open up our boundaries to let the good in and the bad out. So in other words, our fences need gates in them. For example, if I find that I have some pain or sin within, I need to open up and communicate it to God and others so that I can be healed. Confessing pain and sin helps to get it out so that it does not continue to poison me on the inside. So a lot of people think every time, she does nothing but complain and blah, 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 blah. There is a point where we need to stop. But we do all need that person that we can connect with, that we can talk to and say, you know what, I'm having a really bad day. I really could use a shoulder right now. And that's where sometimes we need to be for our friends as well. We can't just be there for everybody to listen to us, So it says here, for example, so that the poison, so that it does not continue to poison me on the inside. So if you look at 1 John chapter 1, verse 9, James chapter 5, verse 16, and Mark chapter 7, verses 21 to 23, they all talk about that as well. So then it says here, and when the good is on the outside, we need to open our gates and let it in. Jesus speaks of this phenomenon in receiving him and his truth. Now he mentions that in Revelations chapter 3, verse 20, and in John chapter 1, verse 12. And other people, we have good things to give us, and we need to open wide our hearts to them. So in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 11 to 13, you can check out that part. So, and I do apologize. The reason I'm not saying a lot of these scriptures right now is because I want you guys to look them up. I want you to read them, and I want you to see what it says to you. So often we will close our boundaries to good things from others, staying in the state of deprivation. So in short, boundaries are not walls. The Bible does not say that we are to be walled off from others. In fact, it says that we are to be one with them. So that is mentioned in John chapter 17, verse 11. So we are to be in community with them. But in every community, all members have their own space and property. The important thing is that the property lines are permeable enough to allow passing and strong enough to keep out danger. Often when people are abused while growing up, they reverse the function of boundaries and keep the bad in and the good out, which I did a lot of that in my life. When Mary was growing up, she suffered abuse from her father. She was not encouraged to develop good boundaries. As a result, she would close herself off, holding the pain inside. She would not open up to express her heart and get it out of her soul. She also would not open up to let support from the outside in to heal her. In addition, she would continually allow others to dump more pain into her soul. Consequently, when she came in for help, she was carrying a lot of pain and was still being abused and was walled off from support from the outside. She had to reverse the ways of her boundaries worked. She needed fences that were strong enough to keep the bad out and gates in those fences to let out the bad already in her soul and let the good in that she desperately needed. So this is God and boundaries. It says the concept of boundaries comes from the very nature of God. God defines himself as a distinct, separate being, and he is responsible for himself. He defines and takes responsibility for his personality by telling us what he thinks, feels, plans, allows, will not allow, likes, and dislikes. He also defines himself as separate from his creation and from us. He differentiates himself from others. He tells us who he is and who he is not. For example, he says that he is love, he is not darkness, and that is mentioned in 1 John chapter 4 verse 16 and in verses 1 to 6. So in addition, he has boundaries with the Trinity. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are one. But at the same time, they are distinct persons with their own boundaries. Each one has his own personhood and responsibilities, as well as a connection with and love for one another. And that's in John chapter 17, verses 24. God also limits what he will allow in his yard. He confronts sin and allows consequences for behavior, which, like us with our kids, we allow them to trip and fall and make mistakes, but there must be consequences to that behavior. And we tell them that ahead of time. We must warn them, as God did to us in the Bible, there are going to be consequences to that kind of behavior. And once we keep reminding them, and then we have to follow through as well. I have a hard time with that because my youngest, he gives me those eyes and I give in sometimes. But no, I need to set that boundary and say, look, this is it. You've been warned. These are the consequences. Now we have to follow through with it. So God also limits what he will allow in his yard. So he confronts sin and allows consequences for behavior. He guards his house and will not allow evil things to go on there. He invites people in who will love him and let his love flow outward to them at the same time. So the gates of his boundaries open and close appropriately. In the same way, he gave us his likeness, and it's talked about in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. He gave us personal responsibility within limits. He wants us to rule over the earth and to be responsible stewards over the life he has given us. So to do that, we need to develop boundaries like God's. So next week, I'm going to read, it says example of boundaries, and it talks about your skin, your words, your truth, geographical distance, and stuff like that. So I'm going to definitely get into that next week, so I hope you tune in for that. But I'm also going to leave you with a couple more questions. Now, I want you to be able to pull up a Bible. You can go online. You can download an app on your phone, on your iPad, or whatever. That is a Bible app so that you can look up these verses, or you can just Google them. It's fine. But I want you to look up these verses and see what they say to you. But it says, what does Hosea 6, chapter 6, verse 6, Micah chapter 6, verse 8, Mark chapter 12, verses 30 to 31, and 1 John 4, chapter 4, verses 7 to 12, what does it say about the gates and God's fences? Now, I'm just going to read this brief bit, and then I'm going to end this video here. God also has boundaries within the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, but at the same time, they're distinct persons with their own boundaries. So we did read about that, and it says, we whom he created in his likeness and whom he gave personal responsibility with limits, we need to develop boundaries like God's if we are to be effective stewards over the life he has given us. So we need to be effective in the way that he gave us the freedom to do whatever we want, but we need to set those limits between good and evil. We need to know what sin sets us off, or so to speak, what blocks our path from doing good. And the thing is, we are not also to become stumbling blocks in people's lives. So for another example is a stumbling block would be, the guy's an alcoholic and you go out and you're having dinner with him, you order a beer. What is that doing to his psychological being right now? That is helping his mental state go, wow, why would they do that knowing that I'm an alcoholic? They're having a beer in front of me. Now I want to have a beer. And it's just, to me, that's not fair. Yes, they should be able to handle that, but knowing that they're an alcoholic, to me, I would never do that to them. I would make sure I ordered a pop or a coffee or even just water, just to make sure that I'm not causing them to want to go out after we have dinner and go and drink. So that's the way, there's limits to it. Someone smokes. You don't smoke in front of them. If you smoke, you try and do something else. You find another way to do it so that you're helping them, but you're also helping yourself, right? Because you don't want to upset that person and have them get upset with you. Anyways, I'm not to go into a big thing about it. Anyways, so guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope that God richly blesses you. If you ever need to talk, my email is thenightowl258@gmail.com. My links for Instagram and Twitter are in the description down below. So I hope you all have a wonderful day. I hope you all enjoy your life that God has given you. God bless everyone. Bye.